My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 35 years old, and last Friday I crossed the Vermont state line for the first time in 8 years. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees since I'd left DC, but the cold I felt wasn't in the air. I drove the last stretch without music, letting the hum of the tires fill the silence. The route hadn't changed. Same exit, same faded welcome sign, same hill that crested just before the first view of town. But the version of me returning was unrecognizable to the one they remembered. I arrived just before dusk, the kind of light that flattens everything. My parents' house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with manicured hedges and flags that hadn't been lowered in years. The porch light flickered on as I parked, as if triggered by routine rather than recognition. I let myself in. The lock hadn't changed. Neither had the smell, lemons and wood polish, a kind of cleanliness that suggested control rather than comfort. The walls were still crowded with photographs, all of them curated. Gregory's college graduation, Gregory at the company retreat, Gregory and Megan with the CEO of Hawthorne Systems. No sign of me. Even the dusty corner where my Air Force commissioning portrait once hung now held a corporate award, one of Gregory's, presumably. I didn't touch anything. I didn't need to. My old room was preserved with surgical precision. The bedding folded, the curtains stiff from disuse, a museum of someone they had once believed in before she made the wrong choice. I set down my bag on the edge of the bed and sat listening. Somewhere downstairs, my mother was on the phone, her voice rising with practiced enthusiasm as she listed names expected at Sunday's gala. Mine wasn't one of them. The mornings began the same way they had when I was 17. Coffee brewed before the sun reached the frost-glazed windows, silence thick as wool, the same kitchen tile beneath my feet. But now every movement was deliberate, every measured between two worlds that still didn't see each other. I spent my first full day mostly upstairs. They didn't ask where I'd gone or why I was quiet. I kept to the routine they'd long assumed was aimlessness. By afternoon, the house swelled with preparation. My father's voice carried through the vents, firm and clipped, rehearsing points about technical superiority, civil defense convergence, and intergenerational leadership. He was used to speaking as though people were already listening. My mother paced between dry-clean suits and centerpiece plans. She avoided eye contact, but her tone turned brittle whenever I entered the room. Gregory arrived that night. The guest room was made up for him and Megan, freshly vacuumed, perfumed with something citrus and clean. He walked through the front door like he belonged to it. That hadn't changed. I watched from the stairs as my parents beamed at him, offered drinks, asked about the investors flying in for the gala. I was acknowledged only in passing. No one asked about my work, my station, or my time away. They didn't have to. I understood my place in their story. Upstairs, I unpacked quietly. The case slid from under my bed and locked open with a soft click. Inside, the credentials sat tucked into the folder I'd carried across 5 states. A simple badge, unremarkable except for the clearance it granted. I reviewed the final memo. My name cleanly printed beneath the authorization stamp of the Office of Defense Liaison. 3 months ago, I had reviewed the procurement flow that linked Hawthorne Systems to a pending Department of Defense cybersecurity contract. The numbers were clean, too clean, bid values consistent to the cent. No deviation in vendor timing. It was enough to trigger a shadow review. My signature hadn't been on the assignment request, but I had been called in 2 weeks later to handle oversight. It wasn't personal then. Later, I discovered my brother's name buried in the appendices of the subcontractor registry. Not flagged, not elevated, just present. Not in the executive summaries, but in the access logs, recurring, late at night, always from internal servers. I didn't confront anyone. I requested deeper access. In the month that followed, I traced the contract lineage across 3 shell companies, one based in Nevada, one in Ontario, and one inactive but still listed under Hawthorne's supplier list. Each moved quarterly funds back into consulting arms with direct ties to division leadership. Gregory's role wasn't front-facing, but his fingerprints were on key technical approvals. His title, Director of Strategic Alignment, had been created 6 months after the first flagged transaction. Still, I didn't escalate. I submitted the findings through routine channels, cited anonymous discovery, and requested in-person attendance for the preliminary review event. I marked the case as sensitive but not urgent. They approved my request in under 12 hours. Back in Vermont, I avoided the gala preparation. Instead, I drove out each afternoon to a coffee shop near the edge of town. No one recognized me there. I brought a tablet, earbuds, and a government-issued laptop with no history. I reviewed Hawthorne's organizational chart. Names I'd grown up hearing were now pinned with budget authority and tiered clearance levels. I returned home before sunset, always before they noticed I'd been gone. The day before the gala, I walked the perimeter of the event venue. The landscaping was new, the building freshly painted, with temporary lighting rigged for the arrival of press and defense observers. Inside, tables were already marked. One placard near the front read, Major General Laurel Haynes, DoD Cyber Division. Another read, Guest Liaison, FCOC Contract Oversight. My assigned chair was under a different name. Not Evelyn Carter, not even my current military alias. Just a title and a seat. Enough. Back at the house, Gregory was holding court at the dining table. He explained timelines and deliverables in broad strokes, his language polished and managerial. My father listened with the calm of someone certain legacy would be inherited cleanly. Megan offered commentary when prompted. My mother lit candles, folded napkins, aligned silverware by instinct. No one looked up when I passed behind them on my way to the stairs. That night, I opened the garment bag. The uniform inside had been tailored in Arlington, pressed twice since I'd received final promotion. The insignia was polished, but muted under the low light. I didn't try it on. I laid it across the bed, then sat and traced the stitches down the shoulder seams. At midnight, I reviewed the full packet one last time. Vendor analysis, communication summaries, access logs. Approval authority, Major Evelyn Carter, DoD Liaison Officer. Clearance, top secret compartmentalized cyber systems. Authority, full. Discretionary escalation permitted. I closed the packet and placed it inside a leather folio. My father had once told me that rank didn't matter unless it came with the power to say no. He had been right. Tomorrow he would learn just how much power that word could carry. Sunday morning arrived cold and windless, the sky a pale sweep of ash and low cloud. The quiet outside was deeper than usual, as if the town itself had paused. I rose before dawn and moved through the house like a tenant in someone else's home, careful not to disturb the balance they'd spent decades preserving. The uniform hung undisturbed from the closet door, its presence no more obtrusive than the air itself. I didn't touch it yet. Instead, I dressed in black slacks and a grey blouse, unmarked, unmemorable. My badge, secure in a zippered pocket, lay flat against my side. The folio containing the project documentation was tucked into a nondescript bag, one I'd carried through airports, hallways, and briefings without anyone asking what was inside. Downstairs, the house stirred to life in phases. My mother passed through the kitchen in soft-soled shoes, humming a tune too vague to recognize. Gregory's suitcase stood near the front door, neatly zipped and monogrammed. My father remained in his study, likely reviewing last-minute remarks. Their preparation was meticulous. They had always been diligent hosts. I stepped outside into the stillness just after 7. The air bit at my face, dry and without scent. I drove to the venue along the main road, past empty storefronts and closed cafes. A few signs congratulated Hawthorne Systems on the contract, though the details remained deliberately vague. Building America's Future, one banner read. The font was all capitals, flanked by an eagle and a line of flags. Security had arrived early. Temporary barriers lined the building perimeter. Inside, staff moved efficiently through final setup, adjusting projectors, laying out badges, arranging chairs. The lighting was dimmed to a professional amber, neutral and polished. I gave my name, or rather the one listed in the DoD liaison register, and was ushered through without delay. The room itself was larger than expected. 2 rows of reserved seating formed a semicircle around the central stage, where a lectern stood framed by digital screens. One of the tech staff checked cords near the base of the podium. I noted the screen to the left. Muted for now, but queued. The file name was innocuous. It always was. I placed my bag beside a chair in the 3rd row, not marked, but close enough to see every shift of expression. I removed only the folio, laid it flat across my lap, and waited. People began to arrive slowly, executives first, recognizable in their practiced greetings and tailored suits. Then came the project partners, representatives from smaller firms and contracting agencies, all wearing the same strained smile of those who understood the optics but not the engine. My father entered 20 minutes before the start. He moved with calm authority, nodding at familiar faces, his voice carrying in the subtle way practiced over time. Gregory followed a few minutes later, flanked by two junior staffers. He glanced around the room, eyes skimming, resting for a breath before moving on. He passed my row without stopping. The lights dimmed further at precisely 9. The screen at the center lit up with the Hawthorne Systems logo, followed by a scripted message about innovation and resilience. I watched the room more than the display. People settled in quickly, phones silenced, eyes forward, the rhythm of corporate performance falling into place. My mother entered last, escorted by someone from public affairs. She took her seat near the front and adjusted the brooch on her lapel. She looked every part the wife of a senior executive, measured, poised, appropriately proud. I shifted slightly in my chair and opened the folio. The first page bore the agency seal, followed by an authorization summary. No one around me noticed. At 9:15, the CEO took the stage. She spoke with precision, thanking partners, highlighting years of development, referencing strategic alignment between the public and private sectors. Her language was smooth, tested, devoid of friction. She introduced my father next, citing his leadership and vision. Applause followed, polite but sustained. He took the podium as he always had, upright, composed, measured. He spoke about legacy, about responsibility, about continuity across generations. He mentioned Gregory by name twice. He did not mention me. At 9:26, Gregory was introduced, his slide deck loaded behind him. The presentation began with global trends, shifted into proprietary frameworks, then into operational scalability. He spoke with confidence, his cadence unbroken. From my seat, I watched the corners of the room, the body language of those near the exits, the way staff began moving in the hall. The presentation reached the midway point. Gregory turned to reference a diagram, a multi-tiered system map illustrating cross-agency data flow. At the bottom right of the screen, a series of vendor IDs rotated in small print. One of them was not supposed to be there, but it was. It always had been. He didn't notice. Not yet. At 9:31, the deck paused. A flicker on the screen, slight but visible. The AV technician raised a hand behind the booth. The audience shifted slightly, not with alarm, but with that collective hesitation that precedes the unexpected. The next slide held longer than it should have. My hands remained still on the folio. I glanced once toward the CEO. Her eyes had narrowed, though her expression hadn't changed. Behind me, a voice whispered something I didn't catch. And then the screen changed. Not abruptly. Just enough to shift the room. Enough to make people stop blinking. No one turned to look at me. They would. Not yet, but they would. The screen corrected itself after a flicker, but the slide that followed did not match the sequence. It appeared without introduction, black background, white text, government header, unmistakable in its simplicity. A few rows ahead of me, someone leaned slightly forward, narrowing their eyes at the heading. Behind me, a breath caught in someone's throat, sharp but contained. The room didn't shift immediately. There was no outburst, no rising panic, just a hard pause, longer than any presenter allows. On stage, Gregory froze. The pointer in his hand remained raised, motionless against the dimming confidence in his posture. He glanced toward the AV booth, as if a correction might arrive. It didn't. The second slide arrived on its own. This one displayed a procurement diagram. Familiar nodes, vendor chains, and monetary flow mapped in restrained visual language. The dates were visible, so were the signatures. Not all of them carried names, but the initials were traceable to anyone with access to internal systems. A few executives exchanged glances. One man closed the notebook in his lap and did not reopen it. I remained still in my chair. The third slide listed shell companies in descending order of contract volume. Their addresses were sanitized, their corporate ownership thinly veiled. One, marked with an asterisk, had been dissolved 6 weeks earlier, just after the oversight review was initiated. The name beside it matched a firm Gregory had praised at dinner 2 nights ago. The technician at the booth rose and approached the stage. His pace was steady, professional, but the microphone crackled as he crossed the wiring. Gregory stepped aside, the pointer now lowered to his side. He did not speak. The AV technician leaned in briefly. Then the screen went black. No one applauded. No one moved. The CEO rose slowly, her heels measured against the silence. Her path to the stage was direct, but her expression unreadable. She paused at the edge of the podium, as if waiting for someone to explain what had just happened. No one did. From the second row, a woman from legal stood and approached the side aisle. Her exit was quiet. The man beside her, head of operations, reached for his phone, unlocked it, then hesitated, thumb hovering above the screen. My father stood, not abruptly, deliberately, with the weight of someone preparing for a response that no longer existed. He didn't look at me. He looked to the CEO, then to the crowd, as if recalibrating the authority in the room. Several faces turned toward the back of the auditorium, where a pair of unfamiliar men in dark suits had appeared. They weren't moving, not yet, but their presence altered the balance. Everyone recognized what they represented, even if no names were given. The CEO turned to Gregory. He offered nothing, no explanation, no attempt at recovery. He remained at the edge of the platform, hands clasped in front of him, the screen behind him now blank. I reached into my bag and withdrew the folio. I did not open it. I did not rise. An assistant entered from the side door and whispered to the press liaison, who nodded, gathered her materials, and exited without looking up. A few others followed. The exodus was small at first, but it continued. In the row ahead of me, a man cleared his throat, looked to the person beside him, then stood and left. The domino was slow, silent, more erosion than collapse. At the front, the CEO stepped back from the podium. She didn't dismiss the room. She didn't need to. From the side of the stage, a staff member handed her a tablet. Her face didn't change, but her posture did, shoulders adjusting inward, breath paused mid-motion. The screen reflected in her glasses as she scrolled. Gregory finally looked up. Not at her. At me. Only for a moment, the contact broke before it could mean anything. Behind me, someone muttered a single word. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to shift the air. A few turned. No one spoke louder. The next slide on the monitor didn't belong to the planned program. It bore the seal of the Department of Defense. Below it, in understated font, was my name, rank, division, title. Nothing else. I remained seated. My mother, near the front, had not moved since the first flicker. Her back was straight, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes were fixed on the screen. When my name appeared, she blinked. Once. Slowly. My father sat again, not because it was over, because standing no longer gave him control. A murmur moved through the rear of the room, low and circular, not yet rising but ready to. The kind of hum that builds when the ground beneath people has shifted and no one is certain where the weight will settle. The CEO closed the tablet. Then she turned, said something softly to the security personnel at the wings and walked off stage. Gregory remained standing, still silent, still watching. I closed the folio. The room was not empty, but it was no longer whole. And I, unchanged in posture, untouched by the spiral, had not said a word. The following morning, the silence in the house was heavier than the frost on the windows. No one came down for breakfast at the usual hour. The kitchen, so often prepped for order and routine, remained untouched. I poured my coffee quietly and drank it standing by the back door, watching the sky inch from grey to white. There were no calls to summon me, no confrontation, no questions. In place of all that, only the stillness that follows when something foundational has been removed and no one yet knows what will take its place. By noon, the messages began to arrive. Not from family, not from Gregory, not from anyone within the company. These came from elsewhere, contacts I hadn't spoken to in years, directors from agencies I'd interfaced with once or twice, a policy advisor whose name I barely remembered until her signature reappeared on my screen. The tone was always the same, reserved, thoughtful, measured, not congratulatory, but precise in their language. I had been noticed, not for the spectacle, but for the structure, the documentation, the clarity. They understood what had happened, even if the public didn't or wouldn't. Not yet. I responded briefly, if at all. I left Vermont 2 days later. The airport was empty at that hour, the parking lot streaked with melting salt lines. No one accompanied me. I didn't expect them to. The plane was on time. I boarded with a single carry-on and sat near the window. I didn't look back. In DC, the pace was familiar. My building was the same, grey limestone, unadorned except for the flag out front. The office smelled of paper and old climate control. I unlocked my door, set down my bag and reviewed the intake queue. There were 5 new case files marked priority. 2 bore initials I recognised from prior inquiries. I added them to the schedule without comment. Later that week, a director from another division requested my participation in a closed session review. The subject was sensitive, multi-agency, loosely classified. It didn't require relocation, only discretion. I agreed to assist. A seat was added to the task force. My name was entered without an acronym trailing behind it. No ceremony, no profile update. A week passed, then another. The news cycles moved on. The story surfaced once, buried in the 3rd page of a business section. Hawthorne Systems leadership reorganises amid review. The article was brief, no details, no byline. A single sentence noted the temporary suspension of vendor activity related to the recent contract. The phrasing was careful. The effect was permanent. No names were mentioned, including mine. I returned home each night to the same apartment I'd kept for 6 years. Clean lines, quiet walls. A bookshelf ordered not by author, but by weight. I filed the Vermont folio in a cabinet near the bottom, locked it with a key I stored separately and didn't revisit it. Sometimes in the late hours, I read the correspondence that had followed me out of the room that day, the handwritten note from a junior compliance officer thanking me for the example, the clipped email from an ethics counsel marked simply "well done," the forwarded policy draft that had now included a clause I'd proposed in passing a year earlier, previously dismissed as too cautious. They weren't trophies, just echoes, just confirmations that the silence I had carried for so long had reached the edges of something and found resonance. I didn't speak to my father, not for weeks. But one afternoon, an envelope arrived without a return address. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside was a single photograph. Me in uniform, standing near the stage at the gala, taken from a distance. It wasn't centered. The image was slightly blurred, but the focus was clear enough. Behind me, people were turning. Some were standing. Others were frozen mid-reaction. There was no message, just the photo, folded once carefully along its middle. I didn't frame it. I didn't throw it away. It remained in the drawer beside my desk, flat beneath a sheet of blank stationery. Eventually, I was asked to speak. Not publicly, not to the press, but at a closed leadership seminar for transitional officers entering civilian oversight roles. The invitation was direct. They were looking for examples of restraint, of operational integrity under familial compromise. The phrasing was their own, I accepted. I wore civilian clothing, neutral tones, a watch I'd been given 5 years earlier after an overseas tour that no one asked about anymore. The room was filled with attentive faces, none of whom recognized mine from Vermont or anywhere else. I spoke briefly. I didn't name names. I didn't reference outcomes. I talked about frameworks, about knowing where the line was, between observation and action, between silence and complicity, about patience as a strategy and restraint as a kind of pressure that bends systems more effectively than outrage. When I finished, no one applauded. That wasn't the format. But one of the attendees approached me afterward and asked, with quiet urgency, how to proceed when the system forgets to protect its own. I didn't answer directly. I handed her a copy of the protocol I'd helped revise the year before. She accepted it like something more than a document. Outside, the sky had shifted to evening. The streetlights were just beginning to hum. I stood at the curb a few minutes longer than necessary. Not waiting, just knowing that whatever came next, I would meet it, standing. It came on government letterhead, folded neatly inside a standard issue envelope, postmarked without ceremony. The name at the top was familiar, though I had never met the person. A deputy undersecretary who had likely been briefed second-hand, but whose note was precise and personally signed. It invited me to participate in a panel series titled Unseen Leadership, a set of discussions intended for officers transitioning into advisory roles. The format would be intimate, off-record, designed to address ethics not as abstraction but as decision. I accepted. The venue was austere, a government annex tucked away in a part of Arlington more known for parking structures than policy. No press, no cameras, just 40 seats arranged in a circle and a binder bearing my name printed without rank. I wore civilian clothing and arrived early. They asked me to speak last. I listened as others shared operational breakdowns, logistical successes, and case studies in authority. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly without slides. I didn't describe what happened in Vermont. I spoke instead about patterns, how they emerge, how we ignore them, how we learn to silence ourselves in the presence of confidence mistaken for truth. I mentioned the difference between knowledge and position, the way silence, when chosen, becomes a kind of shield, and how some victories don't come with declarations, only with the quiet correction of a record once bent. Afterward, a woman approached me. She was an analyst just entering the field, her badge still bearing the provisional stripe. She didn't ask a question. She simply said thank you, then handed me a folded note. I didn't open it until the next morning. Inside, she had written that she almost left her department after being told she wasn't ready to lead. That after hearing what I said, she had changed her mind. I kept the note. Weeks later, I was asked to contribute to a short publication on integrity in interagency work. The editors wanted to include a personal account, something grounded but reflective. I submitted an essay without attribution. They ran it with the title Unchanged, Stillness as Resistance. It was quoted once in a university paper on bureaucratic ethics. I saved the PDF, but never responded to the citation request. My days returned to steady rhythm. Briefings, review sessions, occasional field visits. I spent more time mentoring than I used to. Quiet conversations, no outlines, just space. I had learned that offering insight isn't about providing answers, but about helping people ask the right questions when no one is watching. One Friday in early spring, a box arrived at my apartment. Plain, unmarked. Inside was a framed photo. Me, in uniform, standing at the edge of the stage in Vermont. The photo was clearer than the one my father had sent. Centered, properly lit, taken by someone with intent. Behind me, the audience was turned mid-shift. In the foreground, my mother's face was visible, still unreadable. No note accompanied it. I placed it at the back of a shelf, not to forget, not to display, just to acknowledge that what had been invisible once was no longer. There are no medals for what I did, no commendation, no mention in annual summaries. But sometimes, when my name appears on a distribution list, the CC field is longer. The room is quieter when I speak, fewer people interrupt. And when I leave a meeting, someone often follows, not to question, but to ask what else they should be looking at. That's how I know. Justice, I've learned, is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a chair pulled back from a table, a seat quietly offered where one was never set. And when you take it, not out of anger or pride, but because the work is still there to be done, that's when you realize what they tried to erase never disappeared. It simply waited for you to return and name it yourself. Sometimes justice doesn't look like a spotlight. It doesn't arrive with applause or headlines. It's quieter than that. A withheld interruption, a seat finally offered, a name returned to the room where it was once erased. Evelyn never raised her voice. She didn't argue. She didn't ask to be seen. She simply waited for the right moment, then showed the truth without explanation. And that was enough. There's a kind of strength in those who choose silence, not out of fear, but out of clarity, those who know the difference between walking away and walking back in, with proof. We all carry rooms that once closed us out. Some of us return, not to be welcomed, but to rewrite what that room means. Maybe that's what fairness looks like. Not everyone seeing what you did, but the right people understanding why you did it. So here's a question. Quiet but important. What would change in your life if you stopped needing permission to stand in the room you already belong to? You don't need to answer out loud, but maybe think about it. That might be where your story begins.